Yo, what's up everyone? Welcome back to another deep dive into history. Today we're talking about Venezuela, a country with more drama than your favorite reality show. From its bustling cities to its serene landscapes, Venezuela is a land of contrasts. But before we get to the messy stuff, let's rewind. Let's take a journey back in time to understand how it all began. Picture this: amazing rainforests, huge mountains, and perfect beaches. Venezuela's natural beauty is simply breathtaking, a paradise on earth. That's Venezuela before the Europeans crashed the party. The land was untouched, and the indigenous people lived in harmony with nature. Indigenous peoples like the Caribs and the Arawaks lived there for centuries, totally in tune with nature. They had rich cultures, languages, and traditions that were deeply connected to the land. Then bam! Christopher Columbus shows up in 1498, like that one friend who invites himself over and never leaves. His arrival marked the beginning of a new era for Venezuela. The Spanish were blinded by the shiny pearls and gold and all that awesome land. They saw immense potential for wealth and were determined to exploit it. They called it Little Venice, Venezuela because some parts looked like the Italian city. The name stuck, and so did the Spanish influence. Colonialism, as always, wasn't pretty. The Spanish imposed their rule, culture, and religion on the indigenous people, often with brutal force. Indigenous people were wiped out by diseases and forced to work like slaves. The arrival of Europeans brought devastating consequences for the native population. The Spanish built huge farms, growing cocoa, tobacco, and indigo, all on the backs of enslaved Africans. The labor of these enslaved people was the backbone of the colonial economy. Centuries of colonial rule left Venezuela with a mixed bag, a cool blend of cultures but also serious social and economic problems that would stick around for a long time. The legacy of colonialism is complex, shaping the nation's identity and challenges to this day. Zoom forward to the 1800s, a time of great upheaval and transformation in Latin America. The winds of change are sweeping across the continent, and the people are restless. They are tired of being ruled by distant monarchs and yearn for self-determination. Enter Simon Bolivar, often called the George Washington of South America, but with way cooler hair and a fiery passion for freedom. Bolivar envisioned a united, independent continent, free from the shackles of Spanish colonial rule. Inspired by his vision, Venezuela declared its independence on July 5, 1811, igniting the flames of revolution. The path to freedom was fraught with challenges. It wasn't a clean break though. Think of a nasty divorce, but with more cannons and fewer lawyers. After years of brutal fighting, Bolivar, along with other Venezuelan heroes like Francisco de Miranda, finally kicked the Spanish out for good. Venezuela became part of Gran Colombia, a short-lived republic that also included Colombia, Panama, and Ecuador. This was Bolivar's dream of a united Latin America. Although Bolivar's dream of a united South America didn't work out as planned, his legacy endures. He is still remembered as a hero and visionary who fought tirelessly for freedom. Today, his face is everywhere. From money to coffee mugs, a testament to his enduring influence and the indelible mark he left on history. After independence, Venezuela wasn't exactly a peaceful paradise. Think Game of Thrones, but with fewer dragons and more strongmen fighting for power. The country went through presidents faster than you can scarf down a slice of pizza. For a while, coffee was king. Venezuela became a big coffee exporter, but this made them vulnerable to changes in world prices. Political instability scared away investors, and the country stayed mostly rural and underdeveloped. Despite the chaos, there were some good things happening. Education and infrastructure slowly got better and a middle class started to grow. Little did they know, something big was about to change everything. Oil. In the early 1900s, the world discovered black gold oil, and Venezuela was swimming in it. Finding huge oil reserves in the 1920s transformed the nation practically overnight. Money poured in, making Venezuela one of the richest countries in Latin America. Cities grew like crazy, skyscrapers popped up everywhere, and Venezuelans lived a pretty sweet life. But there was a downside. The economy became totally dependent on oil, and other industries were ignored. Corruption went wild, as politicians stuffed their pockets with oil money. This over-reliance on oil, along with all the corruption, would come back to bite Venezuela later on. By the late 1980s, Venezuela was in trouble. The country, once one of the richest in Latin America, was facing a severe economic downturn. Oil prices had tanked, the economy was a mess, and the gap between the rich and the poor was huge. The nation's wealth, heavily reliant on oil exports, had dwindled, leading to widespread poverty and discontent. People were sick of the corrupt politicians. The streets were filled with protests, as citizens demanded change and accountability from their leaders. Then came Hugo Chavez, a charismatic former soldier who promised to change everything. He spoke directly to the people, tapping into their frustrations and hopes for a better future. Chavez understood the anger of the poor and promised them a better deal. He visited the slums, listened to their grievances, and vowed to uplift their lives through radical reforms. In 1998, he was elected president by a landslide. His victory was seen as a triumph for the common people, a rejection of the old guard, and a new dawn for Venezuela. Chavez introduced socialist policies, took control of industries, and spent a lot on social programs. He aimed to redistribute wealth and provide more opportunities for the underprivileged. He also became a big critic of the United States, becoming friends with countries like Cuba and Iran. His foreign policy was controversial, aligning Venezuela with nations that opposed U.S. influence. His supporters loved him, while his opponents saw him as a dictator. The country became deeply divided, with Chavez's legacy continuing to spark debate and controversy. Chavez's time ended in 2013 when he died from cancer. His chosen successor Nicolas Maduro took over a country already struggling with economic problems and political divisions. And then things got worse. Way worse. Oil prices crashed, sending Venezuela into a deep economic crisis. Maduro, without Chavez's charm or political skills, became even more authoritarian. He jailed his opponents, rigged elections, and oversaw a humanitarian crisis with crazy inflation, food shortages, and tons of people fleeing the country. Venezuela, once a rich nation, became a symbol of poverty, instability, and despair. It's a cautionary tale of how bad management, corruption, and political chaos can ruin a country. So, what's next for Venezuela? It's a tough question. Venezuela is at a crossroads, facing a long, hard road to recovery. The first step, fixing the political mess. Other countries can help, but ultimately, it's up to the Venezuelan people to decide their future. Despite everything, there's a little bit of hope. Venezuelans are incredibly resilient, and they love their country. Maybe, just maybe, they can use that spirit to rebuild their nation and create a better future. One thing's for sure, the story of Venezuela isn't over yet. Stay tuned.